All right, Greg, we want to continue our conversation from probably the video that we made was 2 years ago.
That's right.
On
That's
this
right.
notion of looking at multimedia and moving it toward scholarly activity. It still has merit. We're still going to pursue that notion. We want to talk about it today. We're going to just kind of rekindle some of those ideas and knock it around. Matter of fact, we have a piece of video we're going to show in just a moment of the first video conversation that we had. So the basic premise here is that there are a lot of things changing in education. Education is going through revolution and changes. We all know that. We can talk about that in other ways. I know you guys talk about that on Education Forum,
Right.
For example. So with that change, I think in our teaching, our learning, all of our practices in terms of research and other things, we really need to take a look at where we're going. We need to be strategic and planful about those kinds of things. So in our discussions, we talked about the notion of video production and the creation of video learning moving toward scholarly activity. And when we say scholarly activity, we're going to define that in just a second, but I think in a general sense, we want to make sure that when we put in work, we come in, we do our research, our writing, our reading, our teaching, all of those things, and we come on camera and start to talk about things that we'll use in the classroom, things that we share with others. In a sense, a publication from a video format, that receives the credit that it's due. And I think as we talk about this today and make more of this, make this a little more clear, it becomes important for us to have some sort of mechanism or process to review what we do in the video production side of things, and then have that recognized by bodies that would, for example, promotion and tenure committees and so forth. So that was the basic premise, that if we come on camera and we start working here to develop a piece of work, like a documentary, a piece of a lecture, or a panel discussion, or other things that we do in a television studio from a university side, that becomes helpful to us. It helps our students in terms of that mission. It helps us in our terms of our professional growth and promotion and tenure and other things as well. So that's where we're at, and that was kind of my recap. Now, you may remember this differently, so I'll let you kind of jump in here. The notion of video production as scholarly activity.
Yeah, and I do think it has been a couple years since we
really
first brought this up.
fast, yeah.
And in this time, as we've played around with some of these ideas in our own work and within our discussions, I think it's become even more important to us in the field. As you opened with, education continues to change in very big ways, as society has. Technology over the last decade, it's no secret, has changed society in multiple ways. It's changed the way we work, it's changed the way we interact as a society, and certainly education has itself been changed by technology.
Absolutely. And still changing, I might add. We're
That's
not really sure
right.
where it's going. Yeah,
and that's an important piece. You know, in education with our students, students who are going to be teachers, we talk about the fact that in schools, we've got to think about the fact that we're preparing students for jobs that we don't yet know exist. You know, that's very different from 20 years ago. And so it underlies your whole point. We don't know where education is going to take us. We certainly know where we are today as compared to a decade ago, and we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts here in a minute.
Yeah, I would just jump in on that particular point. You know, we have moved as a university, certainly as a college, and other colleges as well, but as a university as a whole, and maybe even the university system, more toward online distance learning, online classes, more teaching online. Now, that's another show for another time to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that. There's certainly a lot of questions about it.
Sure.
But a lot of that is made up of recording of videos and showing other videos. And I was looking at a class not long ago that actually sends you out the websites to watch videos and then come back and do an assignment in class. So that's, just to jump in on that particular point, there's already a lot of video use. You mentioned in our very first discussion that really the use of video in the classroom was somewhere it started when television started back in the 50s, actually, and has continued to move. I think we need to get and manage this somehow, get a grip on this, what we're doing with video production that is useful, that is thought of. You know, everybody has a video camera on their phone, recording everywhere now. There's a lot of questionable things, a lot out there. But what we do is with a mission and with an intent, and I think that's what we need to focus on. I'm sorry to jump in there, but when you talked about that change.
That's right, and that's really to the point of, I think, what we wanted to take a few minutes this morning to discuss is how we can address the need for a very mission-oriented, targeted way of analyzing the work in higher ed, the multimedia work specifically in higher ed, and determining what's scholarly and what's not scholarly. Because as we'll talk about in a few minutes, that's critical to what we do in higher ed. It's critical that we produce scholarly work. People outside of higher ed don't understand what that means.
They may not.
The importance of that. After all, don't we just teach classes? But teaching classes is a small part of what we do. And just as we're being asked in K through 12 schools to integrate technology, and particularly multimedia, into our instruction more and more, here at the university, at the university system across the country, we're being challenged to do that for multiple reasons.
Well, yeah,
and we've got to be able to respond and understand how to get good at that.
Right.
And we have to recognize, we have to have a mechanism for recognizing professionals in institutions of higher ed who are good at that.
Yeah, I don't think there's a process for it. I'm not sure that we have the standards even for that kind of process. You know, we talked a good deal in our first conversation about the publication process and print media, that seems to be the pinnacle. That's the standard, that you research, you actually do an experiment or research in some way, or do a correlational study, but you gather data from the scientific method, you write that manuscript, you submit it to a journal, and that journal has to be peer reviewed. Usually a national journal, and so there are always layers of that, but generally speaking, it goes under peer review from experts in the field. You get feedback about that, you make some adjustments, you may have to resubmit, and so forth, until it's accepted for publication in a well-known, well-thought-of journal in the area that and discipline you're in. That's, to me, nothing wrong with that process. That it's stood the test of time. But in some ways, when we talk about the new media that's coming on in education, the things we just talked about a moment ago, that seems to be a very narrow, opportunity, a very kind of one way to get promoted and tenured, one way to establish your scholarly activity, when I think this paradigm shift that's happening with video production is going to open up this a little bit more. And I'm curious to see how that's going to go.
That's absolutely right. And I think at this point it's important to recognize, beyond what we might refer to as promotion and tenure at the university, which is the idea of you being recognized as a professor, say, as somebody that's doing good work in your field. There's a scale you get promoted on, and tenure is the ability to reach a point at which in your career a university says, we will invest in you for life, to have some what we call academic freedom, to do some things here at the university that otherwise might be difficult for you to do. And of course, tenure comes with all sorts of pieces to it, that responsibility that we won't get into here. But my point being, scholarly activity is important for promotion and tenure, but it's important for a reason. And one of the main reasons is, traditionally at the academy, we use publications as a way to communicate professionally with one another. The peer review process is all about assuring that what we communicate is communicated, first off, what we communicate is accurate.
Right.
But it's communicated in a well thought out way. And it's one of the main reasons the Academy has served over the last couple of centuries, not just in this country, but across the world, as the place where we produce knowledge, where we produce new knowledge and new ways of thinking.
Right.
We've traditionally, over the last couple of decades, communicated in writing these ideas.
Right.
What's huge, I think, where we're at now, in terms of the overused term paradigm shift, I think, is the fact that we are now culturally in multiple sectors looking at communicating in ways other than writing or in addition to writing.
Right.
And multimedia is the way that we're doing that. And yet we don't have a mechanism right now to peer review our multimedia communications in a way that vets for accuracy,
Right.
but also vets for how well something is communicated, ultimately to help advance our various disciplines. Because we don't have that mechanism, I think it's important, and this is where you and I have come together in the last couple of years to talk about how can we establish that mechanism, the mechanism for peer review. Because certainly there's ways of communicating something in writing that's good,
Right.
but there's also ways of communicating something using media that's good.
See,
But they're
that's
not equivalent.
that's the crucial point, I think, here. If you, for example, let's take the writing piece of it. You are an editorial board reviewer for a journal. You get the manuscript, and you're going to spend time going through. You're going to look at grammar. For example, you're going to look at sentence structure. Is this a run-on sentence? Is it an awkward sentence? Is it the wording and phrasing and so forth, as well as the actual content?
Right.
You're going to look at the scientific method. You're going to look at whether the research was done properly. Did they use the right, did they find all the literature that either supports or negates their point? You're going to look at graphs and charts and tables. You're going to use significant differences and whether or not this can be justified or whether it's a causal or a corollary correlation kind of connection. You're going to go through a long process to vet that, as you said.
Right.
And so once that's done by a group of peers, then and only then that submission moves to an article and actually goes into print. Now, why can't it be something similar for video production? You know, the growth of video on the web is exponential. It is just booming. We're all looking for more bandwidth to get all those videos out there. That's certainly going to be the case in the years to come. It's happening now. And again, we've said before, there's a lot of bad video.
Right.
Maybe mostly bad. I don't know. We'll have to see. But there's also some very good presentations out there that do this and would follow in that same model where there are references that are made that's accurate, as you said earlier. It gets a message across in a way that engages the learner, and so forth and so on. And I'd like to see us move toward our consortium idea that you brought up a while back, of people to discuss this notion a little more and see if there's a way to set some standards into play.
That's exactly right, because what's interesting about where we are with multimedia and this particular topic is we're looking at vetting multimedia, we're looking at a range of things. First off, we're looking at the content, which means you've got to have people, if you're going to do a peer review, that is others in the field will say, yes, this is good.
Right.
You've got to have people that understand the content itself, but then you have to have people that understand presentation of content within a media format other than print.
Right. Right.
As you said, in print, we look at not just the ideas, but is the analysis well done? Are the conclusions that are drawn well done? What are the veracity of the claims? But you're also looking at, is it communicated concisely? In video production, we have to make the same consideration, but that means we have to have people that understand how to communicate concisely within a multimedia format. And it draws in now. We're talking about, as you and I have discussed, we're talking about drawing in professionals from the arts who understand
Very
video,
important point,
who understand how to
important point.
communicate using the vision as a modality, who understand ideas around communication outside of the typical print medium.
Right.
Which means, you know, these are reviewers then. These are people that have to come to the table and say, these are some standards we have to consider.
Right. It's about the standards, and I think, you know, you brought that up, this notion of other mediums out there that have maybe some rubrics that do this. Because actually, we're talking about some performance art, if you will. If you look at the School of Music and theater, and how do they judge a piece of music? Your performance, for example, if you're a musician, you're moving toward a higher degree in music, and you're Your particular degree is performance. So you're going to have to play a passage, just an example, but you're going to have to play a passage for a panel, and they're going to judge your performance on all the various criteria. It might be, if it's a wind instrument, you know, have you made certain moves, and all of those kind of things. Out of my field, by the way. But I would say that has some similarities when you're talking about video production, video performance, of ideas, of scientific ideas of in your particular discipline, how that comes across. And again, does it engage the learner? Does it provide something? I would love to see us really converse with other people from many different disciplines and get their ideas about this. Is it a worthwhile idea? Let's just put that on the table. Should we be doing this? You know, that's always that question. Is this something that's going to be valuable and kind of add to where we're moving in education? I personally think it is. I think you do too. But I want to hear from other people as well. So I want to invite people to have a conversation with us about this, and part of this video is really to look at that kind of thing and offer an invitation to people. There has to be some standards set for this. You know, I think about documentaries. You know, the things that we see on television that are well produced, and they have a big budget and lots of people working on things, but they do similar kinds of things. They fact check what they're presenting. Because if you put something up there that's not right, somebody's going to call you on that.
Right.
So just for that small little example, so if you're preparing a manuscript for a writing publication in a journal, as we said, how would you go about preparing that same kind of thing in a video model, in a video production process that it eventually is vetted by a group, a peer-reviewed group, and also then it becomes something that you can share with others. You can use this in your classroom.
Right, sure.
And I know you've done this, I certainly have done this, where we created a piece of video demonstrating a skill, talking about some topic, and then take that piece of video and it becomes part of our course. It's a requirement in the course that students do something with it, engage in a learning process. So I would love to see that entire process move forward, where we develop standards and it's peer reviewed, and then maybe it goes into your original idea of the consortium. You take your piece of video that's been vetted, approved for publication, and it goes somewhere that maybe I can come along and use it for my class or for another. We share that information. And those are just ideas. We've been talking about
much like an article that's published, and it goes out into the public domain there, where then you'll pick it up and you'll perhaps use it to make a point in one of your classes on a certain topic.
Think about this.
You're not having to rewrite an article.
No, you're not starting from scratch, but you are sharing that information because there is something about, if you go back to the writing process, if I'm doing a literature review on my topic, I'm going to find articles out there that I want to include in my writing, and therefore I have to reference that to make the point for where I'm going to in my research. So that process means that we are sharing information. I'm using that great article, that one article that everyone has to reference if they're talking about this particular topic.
Right.
And in this same way, it could be that with the video work, depending on the discipline. So each discipline may have to look at this, and there may be changes in terms of the standards and how you vet a video in that way. I'd like to hear more of your thoughts about that, because disciplines are different.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right.
One set of standards may not fit with
another. And we're talking about here really embracing more of a multidisciplinary approach. As I said earlier, now we're going outside our discipline. We're going into the disciplines of media production and visual communication and that sort of thing. And we know that there, whether it is, as you recognized, music or theater or the arts, there is a way that people in those fields peer review one another's work to say, yes, this is top quality work, this is not so much. Be able to do that sort of thing. In our field, the scientific, so-called scientific positivistic type fields, we don't do that so much. That's not our tradition of peer review. ours is more based on positivism of what fact is, what fact isn't, how it's communicated. When we're talking about multimedia production, the how it's communicated now takes on a whole new piece.
You're absolutely right about that. And you mentioned the overused word of paradigm shift. That was Thomas Kuhn's in the History of Scientific Revolutions. Anybody wants to know about that reference and paradigm shift. But there is a notion that we are sharing. You know, they talk about the MOOCs that are out there. These are complete courses from these large universities that are online. You can register and take a complete course now. And I say that because I think a lot of what we have done in academia is very closed and not open to others. You will have a hard time. The average person on the street have a hard time to go in and find the articles like we do in our typical job day to day, where we're writing and producing research. We know where how to go about finding that information, but the general population, and what I guess I'm saying here is there's much more of an open approach to education now than ever before. And this particular medium, I think, advances that as well, because we all have those devices that play video. We have the websites and the iTunes and the streaming video and the television and all of those things that we're doing. It allows us to reach a larger market, larger audience who are interested in learning.
Right.
And not just closed off to those people in the academy who write the article, and by the way, we've done this, write the article, get it through the vetting process, get it published in the journal goes on the shelf, and that's about it.
That's where it stays.
That's where it stays. And I would love to have that shared to others, but I don't know. I just wanted to bring that side of it up because I think this is about opening up education in a different way, and that's maybe part of that paradigm shift.
You know, we had a conversation like this a couple of years ago,
Right,
maybe a year and a half ago.
Yep. I have a piece of video. I don't know, we haven't gotten to it yet.
I was going to say, I'm
yeah.
curious, some of the themes we're talking about now are the very same themes we talked about then.
Yeah.
And it's been a long time since I've seen it. I think you brought a piece. Would it be worth looking at right now to just react from?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we've aged or that kind of thing, but we won't worry about it. We want to go ahead and play that little clip. It's just a couple minutes here from our original consortium and our idea and our discussion about exactly what we're talking about today. Why don't we go ahead and play that and we'll come back. Is that maybe this needs a an external peer-reviewed approach that will begin to move this toward reaching that scholarly activity that's really acceptable to the promotion and tenure committees and other people that evaluate faculty professional growth.
See, that's exactly right. You know, when you look at the use of video-based media, we've been using video within higher education since the 1950s.
Oh,
since
absolutely.
the dawn of television, quite
Right.
literally.
Right.
And yet, over the last 60 years, we've not created a vetting process, much like we have for print media, the external peer-reviewed process. We haven't created that for video-based media.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we know that as teaching and learning continues to evolve, whether it's for teaching for K through 12 or post-secondary applications, the use of video, electronic media in general, will continue to become more important.
Oh,
it'll
well,
never replace the printed word.
No, of course.
But it'll take a center stage, and that's why we need to provide a system for peer review of video-based media.
Well, it absolutely makes sense. So let's stay with that topic a little bit. You know, we've had so many conversations in the studio here that we've recorded, people talking about the infusion of technology, online learning, and what students expect in online learning. You know, there are poor examples of online courses, and there are some really nice examples of that engage the student in the process and increase the value and the learning value for the student. And so what we don't have is an evaluation of how that video should look. If you're doing your lecture, if you're presenting a skill or demonstrating some technique in sort of a clinical practice side of things, we have no way to judge that right at this particular point. And as a comparison with the traditional written version of things. So it almost begs the question, why don't we have that? And then what does it look like once we have a process that sounds like to me you're saying peer-reviewed video-based instruction?
Right.
Am I right about that? Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
you
Well,
know,
there's some important similarities, what we're talking about then and what we're talking about now.
That's right. I think it underlines the fact that we're continuing to see this as an issue in our field, and it's not going to go away. And I think it's why I appreciate the opportunity for us to sit down again and sort of recap the importance of this as a way of then moving forward to do something about it ultimately. And I think an important piece of all of this is for us to sit down with some people from other disciplines to help us wrestle with the idea of how do you judge the quality of a video that's designed to communicate scientific information.
Well, I know I've struggled with some of those issues, just getting faculty and even students to come in and be on video and make a video for their various purposes and so forth. So I have to add that piece to it as well, because when you're on camera, you're putting yourself out there, and sometimes that can have an impact. I think it was a Hawthorne effect back in research, looked that up, that talks about how this process will influence how we are presenting. And so there are some technological pieces. There is an acceptance of technology as part of what we do in our teaching efforts as a professor, as a teacher, as an instructor, that we have to get comfortable with that medium. I mean, there's still people out there that only want to lecture. They don't want it recorded. There's a lot of barriers. There's a lot of things that we have to overcome. But I think the good news is that this is a medium that will share ideas. And after all, this is an institute of higher learning. And so we want to share ideas with other people, get them involved. So I appreciate you being here today, and I appreciate this conversation. And you know, we want to reach out to others out there to come on, talk with us more about this idea. We're not letting go of this. We're going to push forward. We probably might contact you as well, just to have a conversation. And it doesn't have to be on the screen, in the studio. It can just be a sit-down conversation about these very issues that we're talking about. How do we take what we can create here, much in the same way as a written article, and put it in from the video medium, from this production side of things, and move it toward scholarly activity that helps others, helps the learning process, and really is a part of this new revolution in education. Greg, thank you so much for being here today, man. Look forward to seeing you again.